Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Voltify.com, a page for passionate people interested in personal growth and personal development. Today we're gonna talk about this following book. Where do I have it? Here. Contagious by a guy named Jonah Berger, something that I just finished reading and that I want to talk about today. Check it out. So the author of this book, Jonah Berger, he is a marketing professor at the Wharton School of Pennsylvania, and he wanted to understand how word of mouth exactly functions. He wanted to get deeper into how it can be that some things go viral while others don't. He wanted to understand the underlying principles to this phenomenon, and what he came up with are 6 steps on how to explain why some things are more contagious than others. So these 6 steps are social currency, triggers, emotions, public, practical value, and last but not least, stories. So as human beings, we love to share with one another. But not only that, we also love to be perceived well by others. And in order to make that happen for ourselves, we pay very close attention to what kind of content we are actually sharing with other people. So this is exactly what social currency describes. Social currency pretty much means that we love sharing something that is of value to others. If we feel like somebody else will perceive us better if we share that particular piece of knowledge or information, then we will do so. That also includes, for example, funny things. It includes things that others might not know and that makes us look like an insider. All these things pretty much that makes us look cool, makes us look good, and makes us be perceived well by other people that we share information with. The second point that Jonah Berger mentions are triggers. Now, triggers are maybe a little less intuitive than social currency, but they also are very important. One example that Jonah Berger gives is, for example, that song by Rebecca Black, Friday. Maybe you remember it. It was very viral a couple of years ago, mostly because it was so incredibly bad. But even though it was so bad and people used to make fun of it, people kept coming back to that song and kept sharing it with other friends. Why? It's because of the title. It's called Friday, and every single Friday during that period when it was most popular, people would keep thinking about that song. It would keep coming back into their heads and thus keep getting shared. This is exactly what makes triggers so powerful. It keeps bringing things back into your mind, back into your consciousness, and sometimes you might not even notice that you have been triggered, but it makes you keep sharing and keep forwarding that particular information. Third point, emotions. Obviously, emotions play a huge role in what we share with other people and what we like to talk about. But Jonah Berger also found out that not every emotion has the same effect. There are some emotions that are particularly important when it comes to creating contagious information and contagious content. So there are emotions that create high arousal and some other emotions that create pretty low arousal. And this does not necessarily depend on whether or not it's a good and positive emotion. Also, negative emotions, for example anger, can be very high arousal and thus create more contagiousness. Some of the other high arousal emotions, and I'm actually going to read this off the book now, are, for example, awe, but also excitement or amusement or humor. These are all pretty positive emotions, and they create this kind of arousal that makes you want to share with others. Some other emotions that exactly have the opposite effect are contentment on the positive side. If you're content, you don't really feel like passing on that emotion, right? And then on the negative side, you have something like sadness. If you're pretty sad, you don't feel like you want to forward that to others either. The fourth step of the 6 steps to contagious content is called public. Now, what does that mean exactly? It simply means that we love to observe what others are doing. We are herd animals and we love to copy one another. So if we see that somebody is doing something, we're more likely to do it as well. Now, for that to work, we obviously need to be able to see what others are doing. If we, on the other hand, are doing something but we're not sharing it with others and it's not observable to the main public, then others are not going to be able to copy us and it's far less contagious. One example that Berger gives for that is the I voted button that you will get if you actually went and voted. Now, voting is something very private, so you will not be able to see who voted in your peer group and who didn't. And thus it is less likely to catch on to others. People noticed this in the 80s and they came up with a simple, intuitive solution. They handed out buttons or stickers that said I voted, and thus people are able to observe that so many people around them are voting and they are more inclined to go vote themselves. Number 5, practical value. Now, practical value holds anything that you think might be useful to others. And value can really mean anything. It could mean that a product is a lot cheaper than its competitors, or for example, that it's a lot more capable. Whatever it might be, if you feel it holds value, you are more likely to pass it on to your 5 best friends. And last but not least, step number 6, stories. What that means is that you need to be able to put your product or your piece of information into a story that actually resonates with the thing that you want to pass on. You cannot just have a contagious story that is not linked to the product or company or service or whatever it is you want to promote, because then people will only remember the important part, which is the story, and eventually forget about the thing that you initially wanted to promote. The more a story gets retold, the more people tend to leave out unimportant information. They tend to focus only on the key facts to make that story work, right? So your job is it to make sure that your piece of information, knowledge, your company's name, whatever it might be, is one of these key facts for the story. You should not be able to tell the story even without mentioning your company's brand name. If you do master this last step, stories can go a long way in your marketing strategy. But on the other hand, if you fail to connect your brand and the story will be passed on. The story might be very contagious, but your brand will be left behind. So make sure those two are connected. And since I am reading these books not just for fun, but also to develop myself, I figured I would come up with a rating system to evaluate how useful this book really was in terms of my personal growth and the journey that I am on. So I broke down the book into 3 categories: useful, unique, and applicable. How useful is the content? How unique was it really? And how applicable is it to my life? In terms of useful, I would say a straight 8 out of 10. The book is highly useful for anyone who's up to running their own business, especially when you're working with online content. You always want people to pass on your content, right? So I found it highly useful to have somebody break down the exact steps on how to make my content more viral. In terms of uniqueness, I give a 7 out of 10 based on the fact that some of the steps were more intuitive than others. For example, social currency, you kind of know that already. You don't need to read a book about contagiousness to know that we like to look good in front of others. But some of the others I actually had no idea about whatsoever. So I do think that there are some very unique information pieces in this book. And lastly, applicability. I do think that in this book you get some information that is highly applicable. As I mentioned before, especially if you work in online content creating, in online marketing, really in any sort of marketing. And don't we always market ourselves anyway, right? So I would say in terms of being applicable, this kind of knowledge deserves also an 8 out of 10. So all in all, we have a score of 23 out of 30, which is not bad at all. I really enjoyed reading this book, not only because it is very clearly explained and structured, there are a lot of examples, but also because there is some unique content that I genuinely did not know about before. So I did get a lot out of reading this book, and I can only recommend to you that you also pick up a copy for yourself. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have any input on how you like this new format, please let me know down in the comment section below. I'm always open for feedback, and I highly appreciate hearing from you guys what you would like to see differently maybe, but maybe also some books that you would like to see me cover in the future. Thanks again for checking it out, and as always, talk to you next time.